Welcome to Moving Forward, conversations on culture, identity, healing, and hope. I'm your host, Linda Anderson, and I created this podcast as a space for real, heartfelt conversations with people who are reflecting, evolving, and boldly stepping into what's next. This podcast was born out of my own journey through seasons of loss, transition, and transformation, and my belief that healing happens when we come together to share our stories. My hope is that these conversations will inspire you to pause, reflect, and find courage as you move forward in your own life. Today's conversation invites us to think about leadership, not just through systems and structures, but through the human experiences that shape them, culture, identity, and the conditions that allow individuals and communities to truly thrive. My guest, Joaquin Noguera, an educator, scholar, and practitioner whose work focuses on how schools can respond to poverty, marginalization, and inequity through culturally and locally responsive approaches. Joaquin earned his Ph.D. in social science and comparative education from the University of California, Los Angeles, with a specialization in race, ethnic, and cultural studies. He later served as a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Black Studies Research and as a visiting professor in Black Studies at University of California, Santa Barbara. And he is now an assistant professor at Loyola Marymount University. His journey spans roles as a social worker in Harlem, a K through 12 teacher, and a school leader in New York City, and now a scholar supporting the development of future educators. Across each of these spaces, his work has remained grounded in a central question. How do we create systems that not only serve students, but truly see them, understand them, and support their full humanity? His perspective is also shaped by an intergenerational lens as the son of noted education scholar Pedro Noguera, bringing both personal and professional depth to the understanding of equity, opportunity, and leadership. This is a conversation about culture, identity, healing, and hope, and what it asks of leaders who are working to create a meaningful and lasting change. Joaquin, thank you so much for giving up definitely your busy time. I appreciate, and I know the listeners will too, for you being here.
Thank you for having me, Linda. I appreciate your invitation, and thank you for that introduction.
On that note, Joaquin, before we talk about your work, I'd really love to start with the journey. So, with your story, what experience, both personally and professionally, most shaped your understanding of culture, identity, and the responsibility you carry as a leader?
That's a hefty question.
Yeah.
Um, I would argue that positionality shapes a big part of our perceptions and our experiences, right? And so this idea of positionality is a concept. It's a concept that suggests that we have a position in society that is informed by various social constructs and our relationship to power. Uh, I teach my students these days about these concepts in an attempt to encourage them to think critically about who they are, the spaces that they navigate, and the power that they possess, both potential and actualized, as they seek to create positive change. So I think my own story is part of what I draw from, right? I'm a Black Latino man, a cisgendered man who grew up in the United States, who was born in the Caribbean. I was born from a Peruvian mother who came to the United States when she was 6, grew up in the projects in San Francisco, and and is the oldest of her siblings, was a person who had to be a leader in her family as one of the first to speak English. So often advocating for her mother, translating for her mother, protecting her younger sister.
Hmm.
My father is the second of six kids, born to an immigrant mother, a Jamaican mother, and a father who was born in New York, but who was born to immigrants from Trinidad, who also come from Venezuela. Um, and both of them became educators and activists who didn't know each other long before they were pregnant with me. And I became the first of four offspring from them, from their union. I'm I'm the son of someone whose mother passed away 20 years ago this year,
Hmm.
and I continue to heal from the experience of my mother being diagnosed with cancer and having to go through the process of fighting cancer and eventually her transition, her passing. I'm a father. Of three amazing beings who teach me about who I want to be in this world for them and for others. I'm the husband of one of the most incredible human beings I've ever met. And I feel so blessed to be able to share my days with her. Her name is Ziza Joy Delgado Noguera. I'm a student. I'm a brother. I'm a friend. I'm a neighbor. I'm all of these things, and I carry all of these things with me into my work. And I think seeking to be whole, despite all that I am, requires me to hold the complexity of my experience, my existence. And I think that has been a major lesson for me as I seek to understand culture and identity and relationships and responsibilities. I was taught that my name means seeker of truth. And for
Hmm.
a long time, that propelled me into critical conversations, critical interrogation of narratives, of stories, of history. I was a student of history in my undergraduate studies. I thought it was necessary to understand the past to understand the world I live in today and what the future might bring. Um, in order to be intentional, I felt I needed to know about what had happened before me. I think all of that has taught me that there are dominant narratives about the world. There are theories of our reality that dominate, and I have been attracted to uh, other truths. I know that power shapes dominant narratives, not necessarily truthfulness. So, interrogating the truth of narratives and um, recognizing that the loudest and the most powerful are not necessarily the most truthful, that has grounded me in my studies as a student, but also in the perspectives that I try to lift up as an educator, um, and what attracts me, what truths I choose to center as a researcher and as a scholar. I think as a Black Latino man who has indigenous roots in the Caribbean and in South America, who is racialized as Black in this society, who is often disassociated with being a Latino man in this society, I know I am a living contradiction in the face of dominant narratives and the dominant gaze that seeks to kind of narrowly understand me and others. Those narrow views of who we are, what we're about, what is true motivate me because I am living proof of more truths than what are often centered. So culture, identity, responsibility as a leader. Um, I think it's often what I try to be intentional about is the lens that I'm using when I engage other people. What lens are they using to view me and the world? to view our work as educators. Um, I think of our society as being both beautiful and deeply violent and tragic. Beautiful because of all that can happen and does happen on a daily basis that is loving and creates new possibilities. But tragic because of the normalization of violence, the normalization of dehumanization in our world, how that has made people numb and contribute to the regular disregard for opportunities to do better. Um, so I don't know. I feel like in some ways this is a very theoretical answer. My research these days, I talk about it a little in a way a little that's a little different from what you described. I often think of the overarching umbrella as being concerned with the limits and possibilities of transformation and healing through education. That means I have to confront limitations. I have to understand limitations, large and small, macro and micro level, but also possibilities, right? At the macro level, at the micro level, and everything in between. Um, and because the analogy I tend to use in work with educators is like thinking about currents and waves.
Mhm.
In my 30s, I took up surfing and I started to become a student of the water and of currents and waves. And I actually have a talk that I do with educators sometimes around what it means to understand dominant currents and to create room to observe the currents so that we can actually be intentional about our relationship with those currents. Otherwise, we just get swept away.
True.
And those dominant currents I can use as an analogy for narratives and the movements of power. If we're not intentional about that, we get swept up by them.
Hmm.
Right? If I want to catch, if I'm on my surfboard in the water and I want to catch waves into the ocean to the shore, it helps to do a little homework before I go out in the water that day about what the water is going to be like. But even when I get into the water after having done some homework and looking at the surf report, I've got to observe, I've got to feel the power that's moving around me because I'm just one person in that big ocean, right? Um, and and so with things like culture and identity, I think it's important to recognize that culture is complex and identity is complex. And what does that really mean? Well, it means oftentimes that we have been informed about cultures that we are not a part of by dominant narratives that don't necessarily come from the people we're hoping to engage or we're in front of. And that identities, for example, being Black, that might mean something to an observer or a listener that means something different than what it means to me.
Right.
Right? As researchers, we often are pushed to think about insider and outsider relationships. If we study a community that we're not from, we're not a part of, we have to recognize the limitations that can come with that, right?
Hmm.
Um, the role of stereotypes in shaping our perceptions, because perceptions can sometimes shape a reality or perceived reality,
True.
right? And so being aware of what we have been exposed to, what we've internalized about the cultures that we're a part of, and that other people possess or live within, is, I think, a first step in honoring the individuals that are a part of those cultures and the diversity within those cultures, uh, the complexity of the identities within those cultures and with outside of them.
So, what I want to say to the listeners too is, and because you really went in great depth with even your story, and this podcast is about moving forward. And so, when I was really listening to you and the moving forward that you made is something we can all take. And I love that you use the analogy of the currents and the waves learning how to surf, but that's true, like you said, in life. I mean, the currents and waves that are going to come before us and that came before you in your story. And that's with anybody here as we push and move forward through those currents. So I so appreciate you sharing all that. I'm going to skip to another question where your experience as a social worker and a teacher and a school leader, and I really want to focus on the on students and kids and young adults and what happens when students feel unseen or misunderstood in the systems that are meant to support them.
Well, I think more often than not, they are not seen.
Mm,
And one result is that they don't believe that the system is there to support them.
mm,
And that means that um, they become increasingly aware that they're in a space that doesn't care for them. Now, how we respond to that is, right, there's lots of variation. If you introduce yourself to someone and their response is not to show curiosity or warmth, how might you respond? Well, some of us disengage, some of us become more assertive, some of us will say nothing else, right? Some of us will leave. Some of us will persist and want to be known more. I think we see all of that in schools. I don't believe that schools in this country were designed, structured, organized to truly honor all people that enter those spaces.
mm,
Unfortunately, I think that's the fact of the matter. I think that there's a deep and rich history that documents that truth. I think that some people come to schools, many of us come to schools believing in the many possibilities to honor children and students and one another in schools. But more often than not, we are restricted because of the systems, the structures, the practices and processes that become normalized in schools. The name I have given schools in the United States stems from my own study of education in the United States. I call the dominant schooling system the frontier education system. The idea of the frontier comes out of colonialism. It's a colonial concept. This might seem pessimistic, but I mean, truthfully, I believe we have to be honest about what we're doing and where we're doing it. Otherwise, we're just pretending, right? And who is really served by that? Um, the frontier was a colonial concept that was used to define boundaries between the civilized and the uncivilized. And that boundary was then used to justify violence
mm,
and the subjugation of peoples. The
mm,
frontier, I apply it to school spaces and to classrooms because I believe, well, not just I believe, history shows us that after the sword and the gun came the book in the colonization of these lands. Schools were mechanisms for social and cultural reproduction in settler colonial societies and continue to be. And those who are not a part of majoritarian groups have been put through schooling processes to be schooled. And the output of that mechanism is the outcome of the mechanism is to integrate peoples into a hierarchical society that is inherently inequitable, um, and is largely driven by the visions of 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 those who are dominant.
mm.
And so that's a racialized view, that's a gendered view, it's a class-based view, it's religious, and it's got other dimensions to it. But often for communities of color, that has meant um, a form of erasure that's normalized through schooling. This is where we see folks like Carter G. Woodson, who back in the 1930s wrote a book called The Miseducation of the Negro. And in that book, he described um, this pattern of highly educated people of color, Black folks specifically, distancing themselves from their own communities as a result of their education.
Hmm.
And he basically argued that that was not true education. That was a miseducation. That's a sickness, right? It's to internalize the deficit views of that are being weaponized against other Black people is to internalize poison.
Hmm.
More recently, I have a friend and colleague by the name of Anita Revilla who wrote about academic spirit murder. And she describes this as being common in schooling spaces where a person's identity and culture are viewed through a deficit lens and how that can shape the norms of school. Even a well-meaning teacher could could do that work, could engage in that spirit murder. And she proposes that we might consider what it means to engage in spirit protection as educators, right? That that even the well-meaning is if you've been successful in schools, the chances are that you've internalized some kind of toxic lessons about what success means. And then you will hold other people to those standards. And the result can be for a lot of communities of color, but especially for Black, Indigenous, and Latina communities, that we're teaching them to not be like their own family members or their own community members. We provide them with a lens to judge their own people as not good enough, right? A deficit view. Um, I think if educators don't understand that history, that the normalization of that kind of violence in schools, then they will inevitably be a part of reproducing those dynamics. That the frontier education classrooms and schools turn into frontier spaces, which sort us. They're a form of racecraft, right? For a lot of kindergartners, they've never, a lot of young people of color have thought about race, but schools become the first spaces where they experience racialization, right? And they don't know what they don't know. And yet, many of our teachers, there's an imbalance. Our teacher population is not very diverse. And our society in the United States is hyper segregated by race and class. And so teachers come with this bias and this misinformation. And then they believe they're doing what's best for young people.
Mhm.
But they don't know what they don't know. They don't know they've been robbed of honest and accurate history of this country and of education and of the many possibilities for transformation and healing. And if we don't know that, then we might think we're doing what's best for young people or for a community. We might think we know better than that community about what's best for them. So I think that that's part of what can happen. That's part of how it happens that these schools uh, fail to honor the cultures and the communities that are served. Uh, Anita Revilla writes about people who experience spirit murder often become spirit murderers
Mm.
and don't necessarily know that they're engaged in that work.
Mhm.
Right? I lift these up to support intentionality. I think even
Absolutely.
if people don't agree with these ideas, what do you think of it? Have you seen anything like this? What does it look like where
Yeah.
you've seen it? How could we do things different? Beginning to question what is normalized is the first step, I think, um, in transforming what's possible.
So as I'm listening to you and listening to you, I'm letting my brain go back to when I was a principal and a director and so on, and definitely taking all this in that, yes, that is what happens. We don't really focus on the history and helping kids feel comfortable here at school, no matter what background they're coming from, and understand race and so on. So on that note, though, and you talk quite a bit about things that should happen. What do you think about healing in the context of education? And what role do schools and leaders, and I'm thinking of myself too, that what role do they play in that process?
I was just invited to do a talk with a group called Deepening Roots. This is a non-denominational group that meets regularly, uh, predominantly elders
Mm.
that are from all around the country, the United States. And I've spoken with them on several occasions. My most recent conversation with them was titled As Above, So Below, Ascending While Grounding for Past and Future Generations. And I tabled that topic, that theme, because I know that so many people in that spiritual community uh, believe that as they ascend, as they step into their higher self,
Mm.
they don't want to quarrel with what may seem like petty quarrels. And I pushed them to think about the missed opportunity of ascending while and becoming disconnected or detached from people's day-to-day challenges. It's a form of spiritual bypassing, right? Um, we do have to protect our peace, and as we strive to be our best selves and not kind of engage in behaviors that we may have when we were more immature, when we were younger. But there's still a need to always ground our aspirations in the lived experiences of people's day to day. I have since taken this conversation to educational leaders, to aspiring educational leaders, to people who are pursuing doctorates in education, educational leadership. And I think the same is true professionally, that as we seek to advance professionally and move higher up in our organizations or in positions of influence, we need to never lose sight of the day-to-day work on the ground. What young people are experiencing shapes their reality and the perceptions of who they are and the spaces that they're navigating. School spaces, community spaces. Um, I think for any educator who cares about healing in the context of education, we have to understand that it exists, it's possible at various levels of scale. At the macro level, we can make transformation. We can kind of feed building on some of the questions you asked earlier, right? These systems change that is more responsive to the human condition, to human experiences. Today, we've got families being separated, being violently dealt with. This is state-sanctioned violence, and it's happening so frequently that it's harming people in a way that is becoming normal. It's even white folks are being shot in the
Yeah.
streets and in their cars. Um, it may lead to protests for a few weeks, and then something else terrible happens, and another war happens, and then a list of violence gets, violent people gets released, and our attention is on the next terrible thing, and then these issues don't get resolved. And yet, this is all happening a few years after a global pandemic. And, it's just, it's a form of dismembering, I think, that makes it so that we're not able to have peace and be intentional. Schools can be places of refuge from this. But to do that, we who are in schools have to be well enough to understand that climate and how to create a buffer from it so that we have room to be able to just be, to be able to be at peace. Systemically, structurally, we can do that. That's a form of healing. Individually, do we have the skills and knowledge and the lens to appreciate what individuals are holding? Because individuals are experiencing hurt on a daily basis. Individuals and communities have wounds that come from structured and systematic violence that normalizes itself in communities and then gets mislabeled as culture.
Right.
Do we, as individuals, have we done the work for ourselves to be able to put that aside as we decenter ourselves and then receive young people in a way that helps to humanize them in their world, in this world that so regularly dehumanizes. So, at the individual level, at the ideological or curricular level, at the interpersonal level, at the structural level, I think there are numerous possibilities for healing, for recovery, for supporting wellness and well-being. That's what I think healing involves. There's an old saying I grew up hearing a lot of times because of educators in my family. If you don't take care of the teachers, they'll eat the kids, right? How are our teachers? Teaching is one of the most stressful jobs you can have. Being an administrator, super stressful, super isolating. If we're not well, it's a lot easier to kind of just not respond when we see others are unwell, to not get at this fundamental issues at play that contribute to lack of wellness. And then we get, we have different initiatives that allow us to address some of the superficial aspects, maybe not superficial, but not the fundamental core root cause issues. We deal with the symptoms of the problems. And so we get to be stuck in the business of acting like we're supporting wellness or equity while ignoring some of the fundamental causes of inequity.
Mhm.
I think this is part of the work I'm involved in today is about centering wellness. What are the practices that center youth wellness in schools is a question that I've been taking on with a couple of other educators. Um, how do we intervene in a space to support it to center wellness? As some scholars have put it, if educators haven't done that work on themselves, they can't do it with others. I've kind of entered a pathway of healing, having struggled to cope with the loss of my mother, for example. It was my entryway into a path of appreciating healing. I knew I was not well. How could I be well after something like that? Right? This is why I say I'm continuing to heal. This is a regular practice. This is something I work on maybe for the rest of my days. I want to support my children to understand their own well-being and how they can recenter, reacclimate, and support themselves to be well. I think that inviting communities of educators to take that path and self-exploration, it's about mastery. It's about self-mastery. It is a spiritual journey, I believe, but it's also about new knowledge, recognizing we need new knowledge and new skills, continuing our learning to honor ourselves so that we can honor others. That's what the work is. That's what I think this work is really about.
You're hitting all the key things in my head for sure, because one of the things as a retired administrator that I say to new administrators is work on yourself too. Don't forget about you, because that's so critical as they move forward, trying to take care of others. So, really knowing who you are and getting yourself through the things that they're going to be dealing with. So I appreciate that. And then also it goes back to your own story and not pushing it aside. As you said, the death of your mother, there's times that we might push it away, but we can't, because that's what helps us move forward. So, on that note, the final question I have for you, as we reflect on everything, or you reflect on everything that we discussed, what does moving forward ask of leaders, but everybody right now, but not in big statements, but in everyday decisions that shape culture, identity, and I want to pull out the word and opportunity.
I think just like the waves that are moving at all times, right? The ocean is never asleep. Movement is happening. It's going to keep happening with or without us. I think part of the human condition is we have a tendency to overemphasize our own importance. Um, something I continue to make sense of. I think recognizing that I'm gifted with life, gifted with the opportunity to be of service to others, and I won't be here forever. None of us get to make it out of this alive.
Mm.
One bit of medicine for me as I have wondered about how I can do good in the time I have here on earth has I've come to learn through my own research on indigenous peoples in the Americas. Um, and that came by way of studying indigenous education and reading from indigenous scholars. I often like to point out, and so I'll point it out here, when indigenous African people were enslaved and brought to the Americas, they were robbed of their indigeneity and racialized as the opposite of those who would inherit this land as rulers, right? To be racialized as black was somehow to be disassociated from being indigenous. That's an aside that I'm not really going to go deep on right now, but and I say that because I think indigenous people are often viewed solely as um, people from tribes and nations in the continental United States, in the 50 states. But Latino communities are also often coming from indigenous peoples. And the indigeneity of Europeans was also abandoned to participate in this white settler society, right? To leave culture and language and connection behind. Some of the indigenous scholars that I have come across and that I've learned from have taught me about the concept of relationality and relational accountability. And I think relationality is this idea of the world being held together by relationships, that all things actually exist in relatedness. And so that's why I started by describing the many things that I am. I am many things at all time. You are many things at all time. We will always be. We are different things to different things to different people, places, other living beings. And because of that, we are the relationships that we hold. I think moving forward, if we want to move forward in a way that is healing, we should be seeking to be accountable to our relationships. And that might first involve coming to explore our relationships with others. Who are we to the people and more than human life around us, to the places that we reside? Are we simply consumers and citizens? I would argue we're all more than that. Moving forward for leaders, I think means recognizing that a leader has to be someone who is operating in service of others. Too often leaders don't act in that way. We often have internalized messages about we're the ones who get to wear the suit. We're the ones who get to earn the most. We get to make the decisions. We're the final decision maker. But a leader can be a hub of connection for community. Now, I live in the state of California right now. We have a governor's race. I was just talking with my mother-in-law about how unfortunate it is that we have so many candidates with who claim to be about similar work, but it will dilute the vote, right? And it actually puts this state at risk of a terrible future. Um, and good leadership, just like we say about in schools, good leadership means we can withstand leadership change because a good leader helps to set up future leadership so that when they're gone, we're not drowning without them.
True.
Unfortunately, a lot of our leaders they're not operating in that way. There isn't this relational accountability that motivates and moves them. Um, but I think that that's the work. It's not always going to make the papers, but this is the work that changes lives. This is the work that can hold space for people's complex issues. Sometimes people need to be able to be heard so that they're ready to heal. And if we just deny them even an opportunity to be heard, then we are deciding for them, this is not your time to heal.
Yeah, true.
right? So I would argue, and this question, what is moving forward ask of leaders right now? I think humanize yourself, but don't obsess over yourself. We can't be narcissists, right? Self-love is necessary, but it's not the only work. It's so that we can be of service for those we are in relation with. That's I think necessary to reshape culture, to build on the strengths of identity, and to create new opportunities, new possibilities for transformation in a better world.
You said a couple things that I want to pull out at the end here and just kind of wrap this up, but human condition and service, so important. Relationships, explore our relationships. And our relationships are there for reasons, and they may change a little bit depending on the season you're in. But I know we talk a lot about leaders, but this also goes into students and young adults is, where are they in their relationships and their human condition? And I so appreciate you getting to the depth of that with our own minds. Joaquin, I cannot thank you enough for taking your time, and you're a busy person. And this conversation, so with depth, honesty, and the humanity that you bring to this work. And I appreciate that. What stands out is the reminder that leadership is not just about systems or structures, it's about whether people feel seen, valued, and supported within them. And then to our listeners, I do hope this, and I know it did, this conversation encourages you to reflect on the role that we each play in shaping culture, identity, and opportunity. And let me pull this out, opportunities in the spaces we lead and that we inhabit every day. So again, Joaquin, thank you so much for taking the time, spending this time with us. And to our listeners, thank you for listening.